I mean, it should, right? Should just be able to, it didn't work. It's going on the ground. Well, I'm an idiot and it's my fault. Now we have our fix for our driveline vibrations. Had a bunch of Europeans in my comments freaking out. She's in, boys. This is my 1990 Toyota Supra right-hand drive imported JZA70. And today we're going to be test fitting this 1.5 JZ that I've been fitting and make sure that we are not going to have any fitment issues. Now, since this is a Japanese market Supra, it came with a JZ, so we know the engine's going to fit, but I just want to make sure with the new artec manifold, we're not going to run into any wastegate fitment issues, turbo fitment issues, and I kind of just want to see it in the engine bay. I think it'd be good for motivation just to see it planted in there, in its home where it is supposed to go. Now, I did plan on painting this entire engine bay, but I don't think I'm gonna go that far with it. We're gonna start with pressure washing this, getting everything clean, and I do have some steering rack bushings to replace. You can really see how dirty everything is in here. It's not looking good. So let's go ahead and protect the things that need to be protected, spray down some super clean, and get this thing, I'm not gonna say it, super clean. All right, let's go. We got everything that's important all masked off and protected. Last time that I cleaned something on my own property, on my own land, had a bunch of Europeans in my comments freaking out. So I've had the best results with this super clean stuff, just making sure that the surfaces always stay wet. Like, don't let it dry on there, keep it saturated. As long as it's on there, it'll perform like a cleaning action. It does have to be agitated pretty often, you know, with a brush or pressure washer or whatever. But I'm trying to tell myself to not go for perfect here, because I have a massive issue with getting everything perfect. But, you know, I do let it be the enemy of good, as the saying goes, and it really holds me back. Main problem area is this carriage right here. It's what I care about the most. So we're gonna let that soak in, pressure wash it right off. Supra's back in the shop and the engine bay is a hell of a lot cleaner. As you guys saw, we did take apart the steering rack, pulled the old bushings out, and I laid down some paint on the steering rack and the lines and the crossmember right there. Since we did have a little bit of rust, we do have the old bushings right here. It looks like they replaced one of them, but we have a factory one for the other one. Now, I do have some new bushings here that are gonna go in their place, and this should, you know, stiffen up the steering feel, make things a little bit more firm and more tight. Now, we did knock off some of the paint on certain areas, like right here. So we're gonna have to recoat or repaint that. And if you look at the frame rails, a lot cleaner than they were previously. Of course, the cross member and steering rack are a lot cleaner too. Whole rest of the engine bay is just, you know, looks way better than it did before. I am kind of tempted to touch up the paint on these strut towers, but I don't know. I guess we'll see once we get the engine in there. But I'm gonna let this paint dry and get back to this once everything is good to go. All right, I gave in and I bought some touch-up paint for the strut towers and the rest of the engine bay where it needs the paint. So as that steering rack is drying, we're going to talk about degreeing the cams on this engine. So I just got done installing these new Tomei adjustable cam gears. This engine does have HKS cams in it, and we're going to set top dead center, true top dead center, and then we're gonna degree the cams. So I'm gonna set this thing on a tripod and just narrate this entire video because it's a little technical and it would just be a lot easier that way. The first thing we have to do is set this engine to top dead center, and while we can use the crank pulley timing marks to get close, it's not true top dead center. These are simply references to get you close enough, but for degreeing cams, we need to find the center of the dwell point where the piston stays stationary at the top of the stroke as the crankshaft rotates. So we'll set a pointer on our degree wheel to 0 to start off with, and then use a dial indicator to find true top dead center. There are other methods such as using a piston stop, but I don't have one of those, and this dial indicator will work just fine. We're going to set the dial indicator on a mounting plate because the magnetic base that these dial indicators have, of course, won't magnetize to aluminum heads on this 2JZ or any other engine. This will of course vary depending on the engine you're working on, and oftentimes you will need a extended dial indicator rod if the spark plug hole is deep in the cylinder head, like it's going to be on most inline 4 or inline 6 engines. I do have a link for those in the description of this video. So I'm going to set the dial indicator somewhere in the middle of its stroke and then zero it out. Now you don't have to zero it out, but you just need to remember your starting number. Then we're going to turn the engine over some arbitrary amount such as 50 thousandths one way. You can see right here I was going for that, but I got 55, so we're just going to use 55 thousandths. Check the degree on the degree wheel and then rotate it 55 thousandths the other way and then check the degree again. These two numbers should be the same, which would indicate that we're at true top dead center. If there are any differences, we're simply going to add the two degree numbers together, divide by 2, and then we have the degree to set the pointer to in order to have true 0 or true top dead center. We can verify this by performing the test again, where we expect to see the same degree number each way. So in my case, I had 12 degrees one way, 13 degrees the other way. I add the two together, we get 25. Divide it by 2, we get 12.5. I'm not going to worry about half a degree. I moved the pointer over to 12. I did the same test again, and then it was the same each way. So now that we've established true top dead center, we're going to start with the intake cam for the degreeing. So you can see right there on the edge of the cam bucket, that little lip that's right there. And then the shim is right there. That's what we're going to be measuring the lift with. And that's going to correlate to our cam wheel. And we're going to be able to monitor the intake opening and intake closing events. And we could also check center line, which I'm not as familiar with, but we'll give it a shot. You guys let me know if it's wrong, if you have done a lot more of these than I have. I'm not claiming to be the most experienced person in the world, but I like to use a different dial indicator for this. Now, it's mainly because this tip sits right there on the edge of that bucket very well. You could, of course, buy a different tip, or you could attach a TIG rod or something and bend it. But this one is also digital. It's just nicer to use. It's just a different thread pitch than that other dial indicator that I have over there that we just used. So I couldn't use those same long extensions to get down into the cylinder with my preferred dial indicator. Anyway, the cam card will have specs on the timing it expects to see when you get to the intake opening event at 1 millimeter of lift, and it will also tell you what it expects to see at the closing event at 1 millimeter of lift. And then we will reference that to the wheel, and from that we will either be good, or we will have to advance, or we will have to retard. So let's see where we're at. I'm gonna guess that the exhaust is way off because it was before with those cam gears. And that's why I'm trying these Tomei ones, and also why I feel like I'm ready to make a video for this. Done it a bunch of times at this point with this engine. So if we take a look at the cam card from HKS here, this is a 264 intake cam. So you can see this is showing the duration of the actual camshaft itself, and then it's giving us the specs that it wants. And these are all measured at 1 millimeter of lift for these Japanese cams. I think it can change depending on, you know, where the cam is from, but these particular ones are at 1 millimeter of lift. So what it's saying, sorry, I wasn't looking at the camera there, is it wants to see the open timing at 1 degree and the closed timing at 43 degrees. And then it wants the lobe center at 111 and the total cam duration, which just means how long that thing is open, 224 degrees. So let's first set this thing to 1 millimeter of lift and see if it opens at 1 degree, and then we'll spin it over until it's 1 millimeter of lift away from being completely closed and see if we're at 43 degrees. As I said, I'm not an expert when it comes to degreeing cams. It's been years and years and years since I've done this, and the last set of cams I did it with, they didn't even have to be changed or moved. They were already perfectly in time, per se, out of the manufacturer. These HKSs are not the same way. These are old cams. There's been, various times that the head's been to the machine shop. The deck had, I think, 14 thousandths taken off of it. We're running a thicker head gasket. It's a 2JZ block. It's a 1JZ head. So things are not going to be perfectly aligned. But anyway, if there's anything that I'm doing wrong in the video, let me know. And also, I wanted to just toss this in here to say, if you're trying to do this and getting discouraged, don't get discouraged. It's just a little bit challenging and it's weird. So yeah, just try it out. It says the intake valve starts opening behind top dead center. We can start rotating this crankshaft around until we're about right in this area, and then we'll set up the dial indicator. Try to get some good camera shots for you to show you what the cam lobe is doing as I turn this crankshaft. So you can see as the camshaft rotates, the lobe will eventually contact the bucket, and that's when we will start opening the valve, otherwise known as lift. And we're only wanting to open it about 1 millimeter of lift, which is something like 39 thousandths. The hardest part of all of this on a JZ engine is finding a way to accurately measure the bucket as it goes through the rotation. There's not a lot of room. You can grab the edge as I'm doing here, but you are going to need an extended rod or something that's bent under the camshaft to measure that entire range of the valve event. We're going to keep turning the crank until we see 1 millimeter on the dial indicator, and then we'll check the degree wheel. And as you can see, we're at about 1 degree behind top dead center for the intake opening event. I wrote 1.5, but really it's probably fine if we just say 1 degree. And here's what I'm talking about when it comes to measuring the full range of the valve event. I'm using a TIG rod to get under the camshaft so I can keep measuring as the cam reaches max lift. That bucket will go under the casting in the head, and we need to make sure that the dial indicator doesn't move at all. Surprisingly, my TIG rod that's hose clamped to the indicator rod worked great. The most important thing is getting the angle of the indicator rod at the same angle as the valve, and that's what I'm showing here with the nut driver. If the angles are off, the indicator rod will move and your measurement will be way off. Here I'm just double checking the intake opening event again to make sure that my TIG rod contraption works and is accurate, and we can see that we have the exact same measurement, so we know that we're good. Now I'm moving on to the closing event, which will be 1 millimeter before the valve is closed, and then we'll check the degree wheel for that value. Remember, the cam card showed 43 degrees after bottom dead center, and right now we're at 42 degrees, so we're looking good. The reason we have to do some math here is because the wheel I have is not dual scale. Better degree wheels would show the after and before top dead center values. Mine doesn't. So we just need to take our 138 degree value and subtract it from 180 to get 42. Checking the cam card, we're basically dead on the intake side. The open event and the closing event are perfect within 1 degree, and that could be my own measurement error. I'm just gonna say we're perfect here. So now I'm gonna check the lobe center. To do that, we can add the open degree to the closing degree, plus 180, divide by 2, which will give us 111 degrees. Exactly what the cam card was calling for. There is another way to check this involving the dial indicator at max lift, which I'll show on the exhaust side of this video. So now we have our intake open, intake close, and intake center line all matching the cam card, which I don't think is by coincidence. At this point, we can assume that we did things right, and we can also visually see how long the valve stays open on the degree wheel. So we're good to go on the intake side with no adjustment, and now we can move on to the exhaust. We are now working on the exhaust cam. I've spent more time getting this little pointer in here for the dial indicator ready than even checking the timing of these cams. But we have it zeroed out. I checked where they're currently at, and we have the opening event at 58 degrees and the closing event is at 8. Now the cam card, I believe, wants 50 and 2 after top dead center. So we're like 8 to 10 degrees out. We're gonna start at 8 degrees. And to do that, this is actually happening early. So it wants it at 50, we're doing it at 58. So this is currently too advanced. So we're gonna loosen up these cam gear locking nuts here, and we're going to turn this counterclockwise. And each degree up here, each little line, I believe is 2 degrees at the crank. Yeah, it actually says it right there, you can see. So that's what we're gonna do. I'm just gonna grab the camshaft here and try to knock this thing over. Let's start with 4 notches. Okay, that looks good right about there. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. Should be 8 degrees at the crank. And I did verify that this is not 1 tooth off. That's just, these things can be out sometimes. I actually swapped out my HKS cam gears for these Tomei ones because I wanted to make sure it wasn't just my cam gears, but I saw the same thing with the other cam gears as well. And I have timed this thing a bunch of times. If this were a tooth off, we would see a bigger variance than that. Each tooth is like 7.5 degrees because there's 48 teeth, you know, divide that by 360, I believe that would give you what each tooth does in degrees. So if I scooted this thing over by 1 tooth, maybe. No, this thing can't be a tooth off. If I were to move this over 1 tooth, let's say we moved this 1 tooth that way or 1 tooth that way, just imagine the white line being here or there. So just shift this over, it would be so much further off. So, you know, it's very well lined up with that marking behind it. The cam is just, it just needs to be adjusted by about 8 degrees. So we'll check it now. All right, same thing as last time. We're going to turn the engine over until the exhaust valve is at 1 millimeter of lift and then check the degree wheel. In this case, we're at 51 degrees, having to do the exact same math as last time because this isn't a dual scale wheel. For the closing event, I actually found an easier way to measure it. I find max lift where the dial indicator stops moving, I zero it out, and then I turn the crank until the number decreases down to 1 millimeter, which would be 1 millimeter before the valve closes. This seems easier and more accurate than trying to rotate the engine backward to get back to 1 millimeter of lift before closing, and the value we had here was 2 degrees after top dead center. With the cam retarded 8 degrees, our valve events are very close to spot on, and now we can check the lobe center again. There is the method I used last time with the calculator for the intake side, but I want to show you how you can also check with a dial indicator. And also, I just noticed adding the open and closing events together plus 180 will give you the duration. If we divided that by 2, we would get the lobe center that we got last time, but I had noticed that it gives you the duration before you divide it. Pretty interesting. To find center line with the dial indicator, first we need to rotate the camshaft to max lift. This means that the lobe is holding the valve open the most that it possibly can, and you'll know this because the indicator will stop moving and then we'll zero it out at this point. Then, when we're rotating the camshaft back around, our 0 point will be at max lift instead of max closed per se. From this point, we can basically do the same thing that we did to get to top dead center on the piston. We can take the measurement at some arbitrary amount from 0, like 1 millimeter for example, and then do the same thing on the other side. Take the degree values of each and then add them together and divide by 2 to get your lobe center. I find that the measurements are more accurate this way instead of trying to turn the engine backwards. This allows us to only rotate the engine forward to find these values. The second value we had was 69 degrees, so 161 plus 69 divided by 2 is 115, which is almost exactly what the exhaust cam called for at 114 degrees. So in my opinion, we're good to go. I thought I was going to get away with leaving the engine plate on the back of it for the stand, but I'm not. She's in, boys. And this is why we test fit. My younger self would have just dropped the engine and transmission in there and dealt with the issues later, but my older self is a bit more reasonable. So I've already noticed 3 things. First thing, I got to reclock the turbo. Of course, when we're building the engine outside of the car, you know, the thought of the engine bay and the strut towers and things that might be in the way, it's in my head, but it's not actually there. So we can see immediately we're either going to need to rotate this counterclockwise to get the turbo outlet further over here, or we can slice this off and weld a 90-degree flange right here if we needed to. But it should just be really easy to clock it. Some other things that I noticed, which is gonna kind of be hard to show on camera, is the power steering line that runs, yeah, there's no way I can show it to you guys, but it runs on the bottom of the oil pan. The previous owner didn't have it mounted. It was just dangling under the car. And I think he actually bent the banjo fitting to get it to fit the actual banjo bolt down there. If you'd focus, that guy right there. So we are gonna have to rebend that, come up with a solution there. As far as the intake side, no real issues. Of course, I don't have the intake on, but it is a stock intake, so it's gonna fit just fine. And then the main reason why we did this in general was to make sure that the wastegate would fit. So there's a local Toyota shop here called Toy Sport, and they told me on their artec manifold, also a right-hand drive Supra, that they ran into issues fitting the wastegate. As you can see, it's very, let me set this down real quick. The wastegate flange is right there, okay? And then the steering rack is right here. And normally there is a heat shield right there. Now, I had to take the heat shield off. Who knows how well this would even shield heat in order to fit that wastegate. And with the heat shield off, I do have maybe a 1/4 inch to 3/8 of clearance between the actual steering rack and the wastegate. Now, this is facing upside down. I don't think the actual diaphragm is going to get that hot as compared to the, I don't know what you want to call this, the exhaust body of the wastegate here. And this heat shield was also made for when the car was twin turbo. We have all the hot stuff up here now, away from that. So I think we're going to be fine. If not, they do make little 90-degree elbows where we would be able to basically set the wastegate in this area right here. But then we would be getting into the territory of obstructing the path of our downpipe. So, you know, it's a give and a take. But overall, fits really well. And this is definitely giving me the motivation to you know, finish this project. God, that looks cool in there, huh? Look at that. That's going to be a lot of fun, guys. Now we have our fix for our driveline vibrations, and I apologize for the bad camera angle, but it's kind of hard to show this, and I don't want to put it up on the lift. So this is a double CV shaft, and in theory, this should solve our vibration issues that we were getting from the lift. And it's actually the right length. So we measured from flange to flange, sent them the total length of that, and now we'll have the proper extension and whatnot out of this drive shaft to make sure that the splines never fall out when we're articulating or anything, which can definitely happen if you don't have drive shafts built after you do a lift. The drive shaft is installed, and now what I want to do is work on my hyperflash issue. So when I did the LEDs on this Land Cruiser a couple videos ago, we have the classic hyperflash from the LEDs, and it sounds like the flasher relay is either behind this panel or up right behind this panel here. So I'm going to find it real quick, and what I was reading is you can either modify the flasher or we can just try to install this aftermarket flasher right here. Basically, I think we need to add resistance to this. So here is the old flasher, and here is the new flasher. You can see that the new one is definitely a larger square, but I think it will still fit in there, and the connection on the bottom of it is the same. So we're going to go ahead and plug this guy in and see if it fixes our hyperflash issue, and we'll of course keep this in the car as a spare just in case. Okay, new flasher is installed. Let's go ahead and check out the signals. They seem to be normal flashing. Yep, looks like we're good. Let's go ahead and check the other side just to be sure, and we'll check the front as well. They actually look a little bit brighter with the new flasher in there. Let's check the front here. Yep, we are good to go. And that's gonna be it for the Land Cruiser. We are ready to get this thing back on the road. New drive shaft and all.
So on the Ford, I just wanted to get the oil changed. I do have an 800-mile trip one way to visit my parents back home. And then I also wanted to get some camper mounts mounted on the frame because I did buy a pop-up camper for this truck. And I got some Torklift mounts just so that the camper could be more securely mounted to this half-ton truck.
Whoa, that was hand tight. That's scary. You guys want to see a really weird spot for an oil filter? I don't have my flashlight with me, but hopefully you can see this. Look at that, right on the front of the engine there, next to the crank pulley, and there's even a chute under it right here that empties the oil out so you can catch it underneath. Really, really weird spot, but it really tied up there. But I don't hate it. Also, I picked one of these up finally. I have several different oil filter wrenches. For some reason, I never got one of these. This thing just made my life so much easier. Just seconds. That thing's off. Normally I have a little ratcheting one that tightens to it, but you know, doesn't always work. Sometimes it slips. This thing, that's a gripper right there. Let's see if this oil chute for the for that oil filter actually works. I mean, it should, right? Should just be able to, it didn't work. It's going on the ground. Okay, well, there's the answer to that question. Shit. Nice. Well, I'm an idiot and it's my fault. There's two chutes. There's one right there as well, and I totally missed it. Didn't even see it there. But now we know, just got a mess to clean up. Well. You gotta love Ghost Shield. Just hit that entire oil mess with just a bucket of water, a little squirt of super clean, and a mop, and it's like nothing ever happened. Totally worth the investment to protect the floors in the shop, and it's way cheaper than epoxy. Now, the oil change is done. I just gotta put oil back in it. What I do wanna do before we put it back on the ground is I wanna clean this with some super clean. This is the skid plate that goes under the engine. Super clean should clean that right up, and we'll paint over any rusty areas if there are any. And then there's one more thing I wanna do before we take this thing off the lift, and that's install some camper mounts, because I did pick up a pop-up camper recently. Well, apparently that bottom skid plate doesn't even have to come off. There's gigantic, bold, full caps text on it that says do not remove for an oil change, but we already did it, so I guess whatever. So here's what's next before we take this thing off of the lift. These are Torklift frame mount camper tie downs. These things are super expensive, like $1,000, but I found a guy on Facebook that was willing to sell these for 250 bucks, so I picked them up. Now, what these do is basically these big plate steel mounts go alongside the frame up in there and then on the frame right here, and they allow you to tie your camper to the frame instead of the bed. These F-150s have aluminum beds, but you know, even if it was a Chevy or a Dodge or a Toyota or whatever with a steel bed, we'd still want to fasten the camper to a frame mount rather than a bed mount. Just a lot more secure that way. So we're gonna get those installed now. All right, the camper mounts are installed. We got the front ones and we got the rear ones. You can't really see those because it's dark outside now. But the way these work is they are a receiver tube that mounts on the frame, and they take this other part right here, you slide it in. There is a pin that keeps that in place, and then you just use tie downs or any sort of other like spring-loaded tie downs such as the ones from Torklift or Happy Jack or whatever to connect from the frame up to your camper when it's on the truck. Let me know if you guys want to see any camping content in that truck camper. That'd be fun. The truck is back down on the ground. I'm going to show you guys something that's going to save you a lot of time if you ever run into this. It's the last thing we're going to do on the Ford. See how I have swapped out 4 lug nuts here and 2 of them are the old ones? I don't know if you guys can tell or not, but this lug nut is swollen. And if you're wondering how the hell does a lug nut get swollen, these are 2-piece lug nuts. So the chrome that you see here is actually an outer shell. These are 21 millimeter, and what can happen is these get like swollen up to 21 and a half, and then your sockets won't fit anymore. So as an example, take a look here. Does not fit, and it does fit on that one. So before you have a tire blowout and you can't change your tire on the side of the road, swap these things out ASAP.